Chris, tell me about your vision.
uh, it's kind of a wide open question. So for many years,
Hmm.
I was a tech guy. So about
Hmm.
43 years in high tech,
Hmm.
and but in the meantime, working towards what I'm doing now, which is a full-time travel journalist. So
Hmm.
I've been doing this for 19 years, and basically trying to encourage people to travel places that they wouldn't have thought of before. And the big reason for that is for travel for me is both one of the best forms of education, but also I think shortens the distance between us and other people.
Yes, it
You know,
does.
the more you know people from pick a country, the more you think of them as like us rather than different from us.
That is a very well set point. I'm from India, born and raised, and
Hmm.
I moved to United States when I was 18. And I haven't been back since I think a year before COVID. So it's been almost 4 or 5 years now,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe six. Uh, so it's I can see that. Like, so there's so many people that want to come talk to me. They want to meet me, and there's so many people I want to go meet in India. And there's so many people that even family and friends, and I can see that a little bit. Like the more I don't see them, it's different than than what I am. So I think I see what you're saying. So I agree to that. What would you say, Chris? Your your vision from being in the tech industry, because I'm also in the tech industry, and that's how
Hmm.
I started my career. And now I'm in the podcasting world, transition so many things to from being tech for you to going to the amateur traveler. I think that's very very interesting. It's something I wow blows my mind a little bit. So how did that come about?
Oh, well, I did both for 19 years.
Mhm,
So I was, tech by day and travel journalist by night
mhm.
for about 19 years, working into some form of retirement. And I have to put that in quotes, where I wasn't doing the tech job and basically could travel more. Um, I'm not sure I understand the question, so I'm not sure I can give you a good answer. So what are you looking for here?
So how did let's talk about the journey from
Sure.
uh, the tech and the traveler journey when you did it at the same time simultaneously. How was that? So you were passionate about traveling, but
Right.
you were in this tech world that
Yep.
you could not because that pays the bill, right? And that's what you wanted to do at the same time. So how did those come together? Like, um, if you're spending 8 hours a day in the tech world, and someone
That'd
needs
be
to sleep
that'd be
eight,
nice to
yeah,
spend just 8 hours a day, but yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm saying at least, right? It's a night if you're working at least 40 hours a week, 5 days
Mhm.
for 5 days, um, and then traveling at the same time doing that. How did that? I'm sure you have to be working online or like remotely, right?
Well, so often I wasn't so one of the things when I started the show, because I discovered podcasting relatively early on, within the first year of podcasting I started, and, my original plan was that I was gonna be talking about my travels, but that actually made no sense because I did have a full-time job. I was working 48 weeks a year and traveling 4 weeks a year, and, you know, podcasting 48 weeks a year. And so that very quickly turned into a show about other people's travels,
Mhm.
because then that aligned with what my life was actually like. Right? You have to build into your life these other projects, these other jobs that you have. So it definitely turned into, at some point I was doing two full-time jobs. Basically, I was doing the travel influencer, travel podcaster, travel blogger. I'll also run another podcast not in the travel space, and then doing a full-time job quite often at a startup company, because I've spent about well over 20 years in Silicon Valley startups. So,
Mhm.
it would be nice if it was a 40-hour a week plus, the other job on the side, but it was a combination of the two. But I mean, part of the thing is a lot of us are not just one thing, right? We don't just have the one interest. And so I was still loving the tech jobs. And as you say, they do pay the bills, and they pay bills a whole lot easier than being a blogger, especially.
Yes.
When I started, certainly being a podcaster, because podcasts were pretty tiny way back in 2005.
Yeah, more people didn't really hear about it. Thanks to Joe Rogan, a lot of people hear about podcasting now.
Yeah, podcasting is predates Joe, though.
Yeah, but he definitely made it like made it much bigger influence. A lot of people are want to be on podcast now. They want to talk about it. Like even recently, like someone in my family and friends, they're like, "Hey, let's just talk. Let's start a podcast and talk about a mom's life." I'm like, "Oh, I guess
Sure.
great that you have confidence to do so." So, I mean, kudos to Joe. I would say to making that.
So
Um,
your Joe is my Leo. So for me, it was This Week in Tech was the first place I heard about podcasting way back in 2004, and for some people it was Serial. For other people, it was just getting it when it showed up on the iPhone. So there's no one person, no one show that has been that influential. It's if you look at the graphs of how podcasts consumption has happened, it's almost all up and to the right since I started, except for 1 year around COVID, where the consumption went down as people were trying to figure out their lives and their habits and all those sorts of things. But it's pretty much been up and to the right, and people, the first day of podcasting for someone is going to be tomorrow because they're going to hear some show. They're going to hear your show and be introduced to podcasts or whatever. But
yeah,
there's always been people discovering it through a variety of
variety of
shows.
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. What would you say, Chris, that what gets you out of bed every morning to do what you do?
Um, Both with the tech and with the travel stuff now, it's something I love to do. It's passion. It's and it part of it is the joy of creation.
Nice.
So, I certainly spend a lot more time, or have spent a lot more time over the last 20 years, creating content than just consuming content. You're not going to find me living all day on Instagram or TikTok or something like that, just watching other people's work, because while that's fun, it's not quite doesn't have quite the same juice for me as the joy of creation, the putting out something and building an audience and those sorts of things. A lot of frustrations along the way there also, but it's pretty cool when you build something and other people appreciate it.
Yes. For what did you do in the tech world? Like, what did you create in the tech world?
A variety of things. So most recently, when I retired, I was a director of engineering for American Express. I had
Mm,
been at a six-person startup company creating some software for financial planning that American Express bought in 2022.
mm.
After we had been around for about 3 years, they bought our company, and we launched that as a product for them. I think it's smart. What was it called now? I want to call it Smart Budget, but that's not quite the name of the product under the American Express logo. But basically, that product is now available to their users for free. At least a portion of what we wrote. The full product didn't launch before I left. But before that, I started in IC so
Mm-hmm.
integrated circuit computer aided designs in simulation. I went to pen based computers, and then really have been doing internet since the internet was steam driven, basically building websites or building communities online at a variety of different companies, Apple and TripAdvisor and uh, American Express, as I mentioned, and some startups in between there as well.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Um, what would you say? Um, some of the lessons that you learned in your journey as an amateur traveler or as uh, a tech person who's creative and wants to create more and more things. Uh, what would you say? Uh, some of the impactful lessons that you learned, maybe that changed you.
Uh, talking about 43 years of a career, trying to break it down in impactful lessons. The people that you're doing things with make more are more important than anything else. You
Tell
know, I've been in a variety of different fields, and you form a good team. I'm not a financial guy, or at least I wasn't when I went to a financial services, a fintech company.
hmm
But it was an interesting product, but it was the people that made it fun. It was the team around you, and a good team. One of the reasons that I've done 20 years in startup companies is I like that environment in terms of everybody's pulling in the same direction, small group of people. You don't have a lot of excess, you don't have a lot of extra, but that's a pretty fun thing for me. So, that has probably been the number one thing, for instance, that got me back into my last startup. It was a friend who I'd worked with for 4 different companies said, "Hey, I'm doing a startup. Do you wanna," do you basically, he wasn't saying, "Do you have one more in you?" But that was the thought in my head is, "Can I do yet another startup company?" And this was about a year pre-COVID, so.
That's awesome. Um, I completely agree to that. There's the when I'm working in first class business right now, I think focusing uh, on who is very important. I think a lot of people talk about the Simon Sinek's like, hey, of why, what you do, and then the how and the what comes later, right?
Mhm.
And then through wisdom that I learned from a few of my friends, um, the who comes first before the why. Because if I didn't know about Simon Sinek, I would not have never read his book. Um,
Mhm.
so that was for me. So if you focus on the who first and then the why, um, I think things are much simpler, much easier.
Uh,
So
the other thing, and this applies to both in the startup space, one of the sayings is that you do the first one focusing on the product and you do the second one focusing on the distribution. That for a lot of us who are tech people, the tech is the easy part. It's the
mm,
how are we going to sell this and who are we going to sell it to. And similarly in the podcast, for instance, it's, you were asking before we started recording how many times, have I been to a lot of podcast conferences recently, and I used to go to podcast conferences way back in the beginning. I went to the first one, the Podcast and Portable Media Expo in Ontario, California in 2005, and went, for successive years there. But the tech is not really the interesting part of that. The story and, what are you creating of value for an audience is really the interesting part. And for me, that is in travel. And then I've got another faith-based podcast. And, you could easily put your emphasis in the tech, but that's kind of like being an author and saying it's all about the word processor. Right,
mm,
it's really all about the story. It's all about what are you providing for people? What is your vision for them? How are you helping them get to where they need to go? What are you doing that is of value to them is more important. And I see a lot of people get distracted by other things, and it might be social media or it might be but it's basically every time you're doing turning on the microphone, you're saying how is this going to be valuable to my audience.
yes, thank you for sharing that. I think that's very insightful for you to say. Um, what would you say, Chris, is maybe one of the few stories that pertains to your why that you'd like to share with us?
One of the few stories, well, I don't know that there are few stories.
The story.
uh so just to give you a broad thing in terms of the travel, let's talk about the love of travel being one of the why things now. What I am doing right now, the podcast and the blog has led to a huge variety of unexpected consequences, a huge variety of unexpected things. Most recently, being voted into the podcast Hall of Fame, but it included being invited to the White House, being paparazzi for the Pope for a day, following wild dogs as they go on the hunt in a safari in Africa, Just all sorts of amazing and unexpected things have come out of this project that started with hey, I want to do a podcast. I wonder what I should do.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. That's very. I think that's very. It gives hope to people.
Took
That
some time.
yeah. What like what?
So I was doing a podcast, just to put it in context. I was doing a podcast for, with the intention of, I'd love for people to invite me places. And I was doing that for 5 years before I got ever invited to anything. And before I really, and it took more years until it, became something like a source of income, more than a hobby.
Mhm.
Now, obviously, that's in part because podcasting has grown so much.
It
you
has,
know
yes.
so hopefully those who are climbing on my shoulders will have it easier than those. I was going to say those who came before me. There weren't that many that came before me, right? So it is probably easier now from that point of view, but on the other hand, it's a much more crowded marketplace as well.
Mm.
But
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. My last question for you today, for Chris, is
Mhm.
it's it's you can answer it whichever way you feel like. There's no definition for it. Um, w- from what you're doing now, after your
Mhm.
retirement, and maybe where you're
Damn
going, yeah, maybe where you're going with your vision. What is success to you now?
so success to me now is when I go into my email, as I did 2 weeks ago, and you get an email like the one that I had from Megan at United Airlines, who said, "We're fans of your podcast. We'd like you to talk about our Polaris class, business class travel, and how it's suitable for solo travelers. Where in the world that we fly do you want to go?"
Mm,
It's those sort of opportunities that come sometimes like that, just completely out of the blue. So I'm just back from Dubai because that was what I picked, but basically they said, "We will take you anywhere you wanna go that we fly." And it's those sort of opportunities, um, are pretty darn cool. And the fact that, some of the times that I get the opportunities like that now, and it's not someone offering me something, but it's that the show itself is generating enough revenue for me to not have to have somebody offer me that trip, that I could afford that trip on my own, just using the proceeds from what I'm doing. But those sort of things are those are pretty darn cool when that happens, and it happens. Yeah, not as much as I'd like, and but more than, certainly a lot more than it used to happen.
Thank you for being here today. I'm really happy that you tuned in to Vision Pros Live. I'm looking forward to seeing your reactions as these episodes continue to move forward. This is going to get more and more fun. We'll have more and more engagement as well. We'll invite people to participate in the show. And thank you for giving us your time and attention. Have an excellent time building out your vision and becoming a Vision Pro yourself.